All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at something a little bit different.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's going to be a little bit outside of the box.
yeah, we're going to be looking at excerpts from Frithjof Schuon's book, The Fullness of God.
That's right. And as always, we'll be taking a deep dive into the source material, pulling out the key ideas and insights, and trying to connect them to your life and to the bigger picture of the world.
Yeah, and specifically, we're going to be focusing on Schuon's thoughts on Christianity.
Yeah, which is interesting because as we know, Schuon was a very interesting figure, a very complex figure, I should say. We'll get into that in a bit.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack there. He's kind of known for this idea of the Sophia Perennis or Philosophia Perennis, this idea that there's like a single underlying truth that all religions are pointing to.
Right, and that's going to be a key theme that runs throughout all of his work. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind as we're, kind of diving into his specific thoughts on Christianity.
Yeah. Because, even though he's really kind of known for this idea of like a universal truth, he also is a devout Catholic, right?
Right. So it's not like he was just, saying that all religions are the same and you can just pick and choose whatever you want. He actually had a deep respect for the traditions and doctrines of each religion.
Yeah. And he also, spent a lot of time studying Sufism.
That's right. Yeah. So he was kind of a bridge between the East and the West in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely. So let's kind of jump into these excerpts now and see what he has to say about Christianity.
Okay. So one of the first things that Schuon talks about is this distinction between exoterism and esoterism.
Right. So what does he mean by that?
Well, basically, he's saying that there's like an outer level to religion, which is the kind of like the formal doctrines and practices that most people are familiar with.
Yeah.
And then there's an inner level, which is more about like direct spiritual experience, like mystical union with God.
Oh,
And so he's saying that all religions have both of these dimensions.
okay.
And he really emphasizes that in Christianity, the sacraments are actually, pathways to this inner esoteric dimension.
So he's saying that, like, going to church and taking communion isn't just about, like, following the rules.
No, no, not at all. He's saying that it can actually be like a transformative experience, like an initiation into a higher state of consciousness.
Okay, wow. So he's saying that, like, the outer forms of religion can actually lead to a real, like, mystical experience?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
If they're understood and practiced in the right way.
Okay. And he also talks about how Christian exoterism is a little bit different from Jewish and Islamic exoterism.
Yeah, he points out that Christian exoterism, unlike the Jewish and Islamic counterparts, wasn't actually established as a sort of separate, system from the very beginning.
Okay.
So it developed kind of gradually over time.
Okay. And he says that this has led to some theological issues.
Yeah, he gives the example of how some early Christian writers, like St. Paul, started to present the Old and New Covenants as being in opposition to each other.
Okay.
Like the Old Covenant was all about the letter of the law, and the New Covenant was all about the Spirit.
Okay.
And Schuon thinks that this kind of thinking can actually obscure the deeper spiritual meaning of the Old Covenant.
Okay. So he's saying that there's actually a lot of like esoteric wisdom
Yeah.
in the Old Testament.
Exactly. And he also talks about how this kind of like dogmatic approach to theology has led to some confusions about, the nature of Christ.
Okay.
For example, there's this idea that all souls were waiting for Christ to descend into hell. And Schuon thinks that this kind of thinking can actually blur the lines between the historical Christ and the cosmic Christ.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then he also brings up this difference between the Christian and Islamic perspectives on the death of Christ.
Yeah, that's a fascinating one. He points out that the Quran doesn't actually say that Christ died on the cross. And some people interpret that as a denial of the crucifixion. But Schuon says that it can actually be seen as an affirmation that Christ, in his divine nature, could not actually die.
Okay.
And he thinks that this difference in perspective actually reflects a deeper difference in the ways that Christianity and Islam understand the nature of redemption.
Okay, so he's saying that, like, even though they have different beliefs about what happened to Jesus, they're both still pointing to the same truth about the need for redemption.
Right, yeah. And he also thinks that early Christianity was much more esoteric than it is today.
Okay, what makes him say that?
Well, he points to a lot of evidence, like, for example, the early Christian liturgy was actually divided into two parts. the Mass of the catechumens, and the Mass of the faithful.
Okay.
And only the initiated, the people who had gone through certain, rituals and teachings, were allowed to participate in the Mass of the faithful. And he also quotes, early Christian writers like St. Basil and St. Dionysius the Areopagite, who talked about how there were, secret teachings and traditions that were passed down orally.
Okay.
And he even says that Clement of Alexandria described early Christianity as an initiation that was comparable to the pagan mystery cults.
Wow. Okay. So he's really painting a picture of early Christianity as being like a mystery school.
Yeah, exactly. And he thinks that, over time, a lot of that esoteric dimension has been lost.
Okay. Interesting. So moving on, he also talks a lot about the importance of invocation in Christianity.
Yeah. And I think this is where, Schuon's own background in Sufism really comes into play, because invocation is a really central practice in Sufism.
Okay.
And so he sees a lot of parallels between the Sufi practice of dhikr and the Christian practice of invoking the name of Jesus.
Okay.
And he even compares it to similar practices in other traditions, like the Hindu practice of japa and the Buddhist practice of mindfulness of the Buddha.
Okay. And what does he say is so special about invocation?
Well, he thinks that it's a very powerful way to connect with the divine.
Okay.
Because when you're constantly repeating the name of God or the name of Jesus or whatever it is that you're invoking, you're actually, kind of like imprinting that name on your heart.
Okay.
And that can have a transformative effect on your consciousness.
Okay. Interesting. And he also talks about the meaning of the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah, he has some really fascinating insights about that.
Okay. Like what?
Well, he points out that, the idea of God as Father is not unique to Christianity.
Okay.
It's also found in Judaism and Islam.
Mm-hmm.
But he says that Christ's use of the phrase, our Father, is actually quite unique.
Okay. How so?
Well, because Christ was, both fully human and fully divine.
Okay.
He was able to reveal the true nature of the father-son relationship in a way that no one else could.
Okay.
And Schuon thinks that this phrase really emphasizes the love and intimacy between God and humanity.
Okay. Yeah. That's beautiful. And he also talks about the Virgin Mary.
Yes.
Okay.
And he has some very strong opinions about Mary.
Okay.
He believes that she's absolutely essential to the Christian understanding of redemption.
Okay.
Because she's the one who, gave birth to Christ.
Okay.
And he thinks that the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception is really important because it shows that Mary was, completely pure and sinless.
Okay.
And he even compares her to the Hindu concept of Shakti, which is the feminine principle of the divine.
Wow. Okay. So he's really seeing her as like a cosmic figure.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And he thinks that the veneration of Mary is a really important part of Christian spirituality.
Okay. Interesting. And he also talks about the relationship between faith, love, and knowledge.
Yeah, he says that faith is actually a kind of virtual knowledge.
Okay.
Meaning that it's not just like a blind belief.
All right.
It's actually a way of knowing God through trust and love.
Okay.
And he thinks that ultimately faith is dissolved in love.
Okay.
Because love is the highest form of knowledge.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. And he also tells this really cool story about an illiterate knight.
Oh, yeah, that's a great story.
Yeah. So this knight, he couldn't read or write.
Right.
But he was so devoted to the Virgin Mary that he would just constantly repeat the Hail Mary.
Right.
And when he died, a lily grew out of his grave, and it had the words Ave Maria written on its petals.
Yeah, it's an amazing story.
Mm.
And Schuon uses it to illustrate the power of invocation.
Yeah, that's really cool. So moving on, he also talks about the importance of humility.
Yeah, he says that humility is one of the most important virtues in Christianity.
Okay.
Because it allows us to see ourselves as we truly are, which is, creatures of God.
Okay.
And he thinks that true humility involves attributing all good qualities to God and recognizing that we're just, instruments of his will.
Okay.
And he also emphasizes that humility is not about, putting yourself down or thinking that you're worthless.
Okay.
It's about recognizing your true place in the cosmic order.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And he also kind of goes into the concept of original sin.
Yeah, that's a really important topic for him.
Oh.
Because he thinks that the way that original sin is often understood can actually be quite misleading.
Okay. In what way?
Well, he says that some people think that original sin is just about, like, the first sin that Adam and Eve committed.
Okay.
And that we're all just kind of like, paying the price for that sin.
Okay.
But Schuon thinks that that's a very simplistic view.
Okay.
He thinks that original sin is actually about something much deeper.
Okay.
It's about the fact that we're all, separated from God because of our ego.
Okay.
And that separation is what causes us to suffer.
Okay, so it's not so much like a punishment for a past sin.
Yeah.
It's more like a condition that we're all born into.
Exactly. Yeah. And he also thinks that the story of Adam and Eve is really symbolic.
Okay.
It's not meant to be taken literally.
Okay.
It's meant to represent this fundamental truth about the human condition.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. And he also talks about the dialogue between Hellenism and Christianity.
Yeah, he thinks that that's a really important part of Christian history
Okay.
because it shows how Christianity had to, kind of like grapple with the intellectual and philosophical ideas of the time.
Okay.
And he points out that there were some early Christians who were very skeptical of Greek philosophy.
Yeah.
They thought that it was, just a bunch of empty speculation.
Okay.
But there are others who saw that it could actually be useful for understanding Christian doctrine.
Okay.
And Schuon thinks that this debate is still relevant today.
Okay. How so?
Well, because we're still faced with the same question of how to reconcile faith and reason.
Okay. Yeah. That's a good point. And then he also talks about some of the divergences within Christianity.
Yeah, he acknowledges that there are, a lot of different denominations and sects within Christianity.
Okay.
And he thinks that that's okay,
Okay.
as long as they're all, based on the same fundamental principles.
Okay.
But he does caution against getting too caught up in the outer forms of religion.
Okay.
He thinks that the most important thing is have a direct experience of the divine.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. And then he also gives some really interesting interpretations of the Bible.
Yeah, he sees the Bible as being both symbolic and revealed.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, he thinks that the stories and images in the Bible are not meant to be taken literally.
Okay.
They're actually meant to convey deeper truths about God and the human condition.
Okay.
And he also thinks that the Bible is a revealed text,
Okay.
meaning that it's inspired by God.
Okay.
And he sees a parallel between the role of intellection for the individual and the role of revelation for the collectivity.
Okay.
He's saying that, just as the individual can use their intellect to understand the world around them,
Okay.
humanity as a whole can use revelation to understand God.
Okay.
And he also talks about the two different ways of understanding creation, creationism and emanationism. And he thinks that both of these perspectives are valid.
Okay.
But he also thinks that they're ultimately pointing to the same truth.
Okay, yeah. And then he also talks about the Trinity.
Yeah, that's a really complex doctrine.
Okay.
But Schuon does a really good job of explaining it in a way that's easy to understand.
Okay.
He says that the Trinity is a mystery that can't be fully grasped by the human mind.
Okay.
But he also says that it's a really important doctrine because it reveals the nature of God.
Okay.
He says that the Trinity is like a mirror that reflects the different aspects of God.
Okay.
And he also says that it's a mystery that we can participate in
Okay.
through the sacraments.
Okay, yeah. That's really interesting. And he also talks about the two natures of Christ.
Yeah, he says that this is one of the most difficult doctrines in Christianity to understand because it's hard to grasp how Jesus could be both fully human and fully divine at the same time.
Okay.
But Schuon says that it's important to remember that God is beyond our comprehension and that we should just accept this doctrine in faith.
Okay.
And he also points out that Islam actually affirms Jesus as both true man and true God,
Okay.
although they use different terms to express it.
Okay, yeah. That's interesting. And he also talks about the Virgin Mary as the cosmic substance.
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept.
Okay.
He's saying that Mary is like a symbol of the feminine principle of creation,
Okay.
and that she embodies all the qualities of purity, beauty, and goodness.
Okay.
And he thinks that the Hail Mary is a really powerful prayer because it invokes all of those qualities.
Okay, yeah. That makes sense. And he also compares the Lord's Prayer and the Ave Maria.
Yeah, he says that the Lord's Prayer is the most perfect prayer because it was given to us by Christ himself.
Okay.
But he also says that the Ave Maria is a very powerful prayer because it contains the name of Christ.
Okay.
And he thinks that the name of Christ is, like a magical formula
Okay.
that can actually bring us closer to God.
Okay, yeah. That's really interesting. And then he also talks about the symbolism of the cross.
Yeah, he sees the cross as a symbol of the paradox of existence.
Okay.
Because it represents both suffering and redemption.
Okay.
And he thinks that the cross is a reminder that we have to die to our ego in order to be reborn in Christ.
Okay, yeah. That's powerful. And he also talks about the importance of not casting the first stone.
Yeah, he thinks that this is a really important teaching because
Okay.
it reminds us that we're all sinners,
Okay.
and that we should have compassion for others,
Okay.
even those who have wronged us.
Okay. Yeah. That's a good point. And he also talks about the importance of loving our enemies.
Yeah, he says that this is the highest form of love
Okay.
because it's the most selfless.
Okay.
And he thinks that it's only by loving our enemies that we can truly overcome our ego.
Okay, yeah. That's really challenging. So kind of wrapping up, he talks about intrinsic esotericism in Christianity.
Yeah, he says that this is basically the same as esotericism in any other tradition.
Okay.
It's about discerning between the real and the unreal and concentrating on the real.
Okay.
And he thinks that the best way to do this is through invocation,
Okay.
because invocation helps us to focus our attention on God.
Okay.
And he also emphasizes the importance of virtue,
Okay.
because virtue is the outward expression of our inner state.
Okay, yeah. That makes sense. And he also talks about the glorious mysteries of the Rosary.
Yeah, he gives some really interesting esoteric interpretations of those mysteries.
Okay.
He sees them as representing different stages of spiritual development.
Okay.
And he thinks that contemplating these mysteries can help us to grow closer to God.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's really cool. So I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, we have. I mean, Schuon is a very, very dense thinker, but I think we've done a pretty good job of kind of, summarizing his main points.
Yeah, I think so. And it's really interesting to see how he brings together all these different traditions.
Yeah.
And he shows how they're all, kind of pointing to the same truth.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that makes his work so valuable is that it helps us to see the underlying unity of all religions.
Yeah, I agree. And it also kind of challenges us to go deeper in our own faith.
Yeah.
And to not just be satisfied with the outer forms.
Right. Yeah. And to really, seek out that direct experience of the divine.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message. So I think that's a good place to wrap up for today.
Yeah, I think so.
But before we go, I just want to leave you with a final thought.
Okay.
So Schuon talks a lot about how important it is to discern between the real and the unreal.
Right.
And I think that's something that's really relevant to our lives today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there's so much information coming at us from all directions.
Right.
And it can be really hard to know what to believe.
Yeah.
So I think Schuon's work can really help us to develop that discernment.
Yeah, I agree.
And to find our way back to the truth.
To the real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I encourage you to check out his work.
And see what resonates with you.
Yeah. And see how it can help you to live a more meaningful life.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end it.
All right. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.